Good morning, everyone. Rise and shine. It is very early, and I thought I'd just pop on this morning and get started kind of early. And for those of you who can join in, you're welcome to join in. Come on in. I love to have you join. And I know there are so many others that, is probably still getting ready for work and either on their drive to work, getting dressed, getting prepared to go to work or whatever. And I do get that. So you can always catch the replay either here in the group or later on my YouTube channel. Um, Nevertheless, I'm just going to give a few more seconds to have some folks come on and then I'll move forward. For me, it's always important to kind of start my day off right. And how do I do that? I wake up in the morning. I listen to, something inspirational and uplifting to kind of get my mind right. I have, of course, my morning cup of Joe. That would be a cup of coffee. And then I get going. For the most part, I'll be working from home today. So I'm a little bit fortunate where I have a home office and sometimes I get to work from home. So I'll be going in a little bit late. And so because I still have a little bit of time to kill, I thought I'd come out and talk to you all. So I do have one practice question that I do want to share and talk about and kind of go over briefly. But before I even do that, as always, I just want to give you guys some encouragement. First, I want to congratulate all of those folks who passed the exam over, the weekend. And over, I just want to say congratulations, good job. And for those who are still prepping and preparing, hang in there. And for those who didn't make it this time, that's okay. It's not over. This is a difficult exam. And it's so important that we understand the concept and the nature of the exam and how they're assessing us on this exam. So this is a standardized exam, all of which we already know. And standardized exams are not easy. And so they're not really looking for how you would particularly answer a question in your own practice field, but they're looking at how do you strategize, how do you process, how do you reason, how do you analyze situations that you are faced with. And so this is really based on analytical skills and processing skills and reasoning skills. And so there are only 3 types of questions that the ASWB will give you. And those 3 questions are recall questions, application questions, and reasoning questions. And so the recall questions, if you don't already know, which I say so often, are questions that you either know them or you don't. Now, they will be written in scenario vignette format, right? So it's not going to be a direct question asking you to pull from memory like how we usually understand recall and memory type questions to be. And so even if you're making those practice cards to study from and trying to memorize this information, which is necessary but is not important, is really about understanding the concepts and internalizing that. So if you understand the concepts, you've internalized them. When you come across a question or a situation or a scenario or a concept that you're familiar with, it will trigger a thought and it will help you to be able to connect with that information. So that's your recall questions. Your application questions are basically your skills, okay? So the KSA and RAR, they coincide with each other, right? So the recall is what you know, that's your K, your knowledge. Your application is your skill, that's the S, the skill set that you have with being a social worker, understanding when to apply situations and how to apply them, and excuse me, in which context they need to be applied. So that's your application. That coincides with the S, your skills. And then your reasoning, right? That coincides with the analytical ability, okay? Analyze the question, see it, and give your reasoning, your rationale behind why this is the best answer as opposed to that being the best answer, okay? So what I also noticed is that a lot of you guys, you'll answer the questions, but you'll just kind of give, an answer because it looks like it's the best answer, but you're not really giving a rationale behind why this is the correct answer as opposed to why this is not. So all of my students, yes, I'm a tutor as well. all of my students, when they work with me, they understand that I do not accept them just giving me an answer. They have to give a reasoning and a rationale for A, B, C, and D. That reasoning and rationale for why A is not the correct answer and why B is. That reasoning and rationale for why C is not the correct answer and B is. And that reasoning and rationale for why D is not the correct answer and why B is. And so I think if you get yourself in the practice and the habit of doing that and being able to talk through, analyze and reason and process through the answers, then it would make more sense. Okay, so that's my introduction. I think we got a couple of people here, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on. Good morning, and thank you guys again for joining me. Okay, so let's take a look at the practice question. And if I'm talking too fast, guys, if you can hear me, kind of type in the box that you can hear me and let me know that you're with me. And so that way I know that we're on point. Okay, so let's read this question together. And I'm actually going to try something different, right? I'm going to put up a poll. So if you can see the poll, let me know. So that way I know that this is working, okay? If you can see the poll, let me know. And I'm going to go ahead and read this question. So a social worker meets with a 34-year-old woman in an initial session prior to completing the informed consent process and contracting for services. The social worker becomes aware that the client's husband works with the social worker's husband. What is the best way for the social worker to handle the situation? A, seek supervision. B, immediately refer the client to another social worker. C, ask the client how she feels about the situation. Or D, discuss the impact with the client and provide her with a list of other social workers. If you can see the poll, if you can see the question, then go ahead and answer the poll. Choose A, B, C, or D, whichever answer you think is the correct answer. And I'll give you guys a few minutes before I come back to discuss the answer. All right, I do see some folks are selecting their answer. Great. So I'll give you a few more minutes. Well, not minutes, a few more seconds to go ahead and answer the question. And I see we have more people joining in. If you missed the first half of the discussion, that's fine. You can always catch this on the replay. All right. And so for those of you who answered, I'm going to go ahead and pull back the poll. Just keep in mind that your answers are private, so no one else can see what you're actually selecting but me. So you don't have to be afraid to go ahead and select the answers. I'm just trying to find various ways to keep this interactive so that we can all dialogue and discuss together, and I could get you guys involved. I think it's more beneficial for you if you're able to be more engaged and engage with me in this process. Okay. All right, looking good, looking good, looking good. Okay. Huh. The results are keep jumping back and forth. That's interesting. Very good. All right. Now let me see, because this is actually my first time using this. So I'm all new to this as well. This process, I'm always all right, so I just went ahead and published the results. So the poll is actually closed now. And here's what we have. So we have 20% that's saying immediately refer to, immediately refer the client to another social worker. We have, it's still changing. We have a larger percentage, about 50%, that's saying ask the client how she feels about the situation. And then we got about 33% saying discuss the impact with the client and provide her with a list of other social workers. Okay, cool. So let's try to take a look at this a little bit closely. Let's see how we can process this together. So here we have a social worker who's meeting with a social worker who's meeting with a woman, and it's their initial session, right? So we know this is the beginning phase of treatment. And how do we know that? Because it states that for us right here very clearly. It's an initial session. So that's key. That's a key word there. And we want to keep that in mind. So we're in the beginning phase of treatment, right? And we know in the beginning phase of treatment, this is where we're getting to know who we're working with. And we set the treatment process up. So another key word, let's pay attention to this word because I think that's important. It says prior to, it says prior to completing the informed consent, right? That word prior to suggests that that we haven't even really moved forward in the therapeutic process just yet. So it's letting us know prior to completing the informed consent process and contracting for services, right? So we know when we're contracting for services, we've made an agreement. We've made an agreement to actually provide services. And so if we're seeing that word prior to contracting for services, I think it's fair and it's safe to say that we haven't opened up this woman yet for services. So we know it's an initial session. We're still in the beginning stages. We really don't know much about her. We haven't even talked about the informed consent. So we haven't even explained to her her rights and help her to understand the therapeutic process and what that means, given her the instruction in regards to the therapeutic process and what will take place. We haven't even discussed fees or anything. We haven't even contracted for services yet. So we haven't even moved on. And in that process, what did we learn just from the introduction? We learned that the social worker actually works with the client's husband, right? So we now know that the client husband, the client who came in to see the social worker, and the husband actually works together. And so because of that, we have what we would call a dilemma, right? So now we got a dilemma. And this particular question is dealing with ethical standards, right? So this is covering that KSA portion of ethics. We're finding ourselves in a dilemma. We have a problem here that we need to deal with. And the person that has the problem is who? If you look at the question closely, you can see who's the person that we actually need to address. So who's the person that's actually having this dilemma, the problem? Is it the client or is it the social worker? Is it the client or is it the social worker that's actually having this problem? Write it in the comment section before I move on. I would like to see some responses. Is it the client or is it the social worker that's actually having the dilemma? Okay. If you could talk back to me, guys, that would be awesome. If not, I get it, but I like some feedback. All right, there we go. Nice, nice. Okay, so I see some responses popping up. And so what we have here, the person that we're addressing in this particular scenario is actually the social worker. Okay, she's the one that's having the dilemma, right? And so the content area that's being assessed here for this particular question is ethics, right? Ethical dilemma. So the content area that's being assessed. And how do I know that? I know that because I've studied my ethics, right? I know that because I paid attention to some things, right? I know that because as I read this question, what I'm familiar with is that the social worker just found herself in a situation. She stopped, she paused. The scenario suggests that, you know, she had to kind of consider some things because she learned, if you see here, she learned that the client's husband works with with her. And so because of that, she has a dilemma, she has a problem. So the person that we're addressing here is the social worker. The problem, the situation, or the dilemma, or the issue that we need to be addressing here in this scenario is that the social worker, what? Learns that she works with the client's husband. So that's the issue that we need to address. Okay, so I'm gonna stop right there. So we have the person that we're addressing in this situation, which is the social worker. Great. We know what the problem is, which is the social worker learns that she works with the client's husband. We understand that there is a dilemma because we have a client who came in to see you. This client is coming in to see you. She would like for you to provide her with services. As you're going through the introduction process, you learn that you actually work with her husband, and there's a dilemma. So what do we do? What's the best way for you, the social worker, to handle this situation? All in all, we know this is a content area. This content area that's being assessed is ethics, ethical dilemmas. So how do we work through and process this problem when we have a dilemma? Now, the ethics standards, the ASW Code of Ethics, it does give us some, recommendations and some specifics on how to handle a situation when you find yourself you could be potentially in a dual situation. I'm sorry, I'm like flipping over my words. So let's look at the question and let's look at the answers, right? So we already know that the social worker is in a dilemma. So how should she answer this? How should she handle this? What's the best way? Notice it doesn't say what's the correct answer or what's the correct way to answer, to follow up with this, but it says what's the best way. Well, let's look at answer A. So as we're going through these questions, I want to process this with you. I don't just want to say it's answer A, answer B, or answer C, but what I think is really important is that we identify why each one is not or it is the correct answer. Okay, so let's go through this together. All right, so A, is the best way for her to follow up with this is to seek supervision? Well, because we know that this is the beginning phase of treatment, right? She's not even a client, right? She is not a client. And so because she's not a client, why should we seek supervision? We shouldn't, right? We don't need to seek supervision for someone that we're not even providing services for. So we can rule out answer A, okay? Does that make sense to you guys? She's not my client. She's not your client. She's coming in for services. We know that she's not our client because the scenario suggests that this is the initial phase of treatment. And so because we haven't even gone through the informed consent or contracted with her, we haven't opened her up for service. So we can rule out answer A for being the best way to handle the situation. We do not need to seek our supervisor on this one. How about B? Immediately refer the client to another social worker. Well, let's look at this word here, immediately. All right, that word immediately stood out for me, and it does a disservice in a lot of different ways. Here it is, it's telling me just to bypass how the client would feel and bypass considering her and just ignoring her feelings. So I would not do that, just immediately referring her to a client, to another social worker, and she came in to see me. That's not cool. So the word immediately is a red flag, right? Pay attention to that word. We don't want to just disregard the client and just ignore her and just bypass her and just send her off to another social worker. She actually chose you. She came in to see you. So let's be a little bit more sensitive to her needs as well. So pay attention to that word immediately. That's a quantifier. That's a word that's kind of that's a descriptive word that's kind of suggesting what we're doing right in the moment. The word immediate is a red flag. We don't want to disregard the feelings and let's go, of the client. All right, I mean, she's still, she's still a person. We just don't want to disregard her. Does that make any sense? Let's see here. So I'm actually trying to pay attention to what you guys are writing in the comment section and also trying to keep afloat. Okay. All right. So we can rule out A. We can rule out B. Now let's take a look at C. C says, ask the client how she feels about the situation. Now, this is possible, right? And I see a lot of you guys kind of chose this one too. You kind of went back and forth between C and D. Now, and the reason why we want to ask the client about how she feels about it, because we want to know if she want to stay with us or not. Well, because this is not necessarily about the client per se, and it's the social worker with the dilemma, in this particular situation, notice I said in this particular situation, we don't want to ask her about how she feels about, how do you feel about me working with you? And, as my client, and, your husband is my coworker. Are you okay with that? Chances are she just might say, yeah, I don't know. She might say, yeah, that's why I came to you or whatever. I don't know. But the situation here is we know that if we take her on as a client and her husband is our coworker, then we're going to find ourselves in a little pickle. All right, we could quite possibly be here, dealing with a dual relationship. And that's something that if we can avoid altogether, then the best answer or the best choice would be avoiding that. Notice I said if we can avoid it. Now, it's not like she's an established client already. It's not like, we learned after we opened her up and we've seen her for a couple of sessions, and then she mentioned her husband's name and we realized, oh, wow, he's my coworker. This is the beginning phase of treatment. This is the initial assessment. We haven't completed the informed consent, and we have not contracted for services. So because of that, we still have an out. We still have a way to prevent putting ourselves in a pickle and finding ourselves in a dual relationship. So C would not be the correct answer, because we do know that we have a dilemma. And so we do not want to solicit her, I'm trying to find the right word. We don't want to really solicit her response in regards to what we should do and how we should follow up with this. And so I'm going to say no to this one, because we want to avoid getting ourselves into a dual relationship. And if she says yes, what you're going to say? What are you going to do? If she says yes, I want you to still work with me, I'm okay with that. Are you going to move forward with that and then put yourself in a situation where now you're potentially working with her and with her husband? I don't think that would be the best response. So then that leaves us with answer D. Are you guys still with me? I'm so busy talking here. I just want to make sure you guys are still with me. Am I making sense? Is this making any sense to you guys? All right. I see a couple of you are still popping in, and that's really good. Okay. So now that leaves us with D, right? And so it says, discuss the impact with the client and provide her with a list of other social workers. Out of the 4 answer choices, D is the best answer, right? And why? B is the best answer choices for a couple of things. 1, we know that she is not our client, correct? 2, we haven't contracted for services. 3, it gives us an opportunity to discuss with her the dilemma that we're facing and why this wouldn't be a healthy choice at the moment, simply because of the relationship, the work relationship that she holds with her husband, and taking her on as a client could potentially put them in a dual relationship and make providing adequate services really difficult to do. And the social worker do not want to put herself in that type of a situation. I myself know as a therapist, I wouldn't want to do that and find myself, in that type of pickle. So we want to discuss with her what the impact would be like, and the dilemma that we're facing. We want to provide her with a list of choices, a list of other social workers that she can choose from. So that way she can, select someone that she may feel comfortable with. We don't want to just refer her to just any, just one other person, but we want to give her some choices that she can select from, and then help and assist her with that transition process. So out of the 4 answer choices, D is the best one. D is the best one because it eliminates the possibility of us falling into a dilemma. It allows us to explain to her the situation, and it puts us in a position where we can give her some choices of other therapists that she can choose from and still be able to move on and forward with services and being able to get her needs met. So with all that being said, I hope this made sense. And what I wanted to point out here is a couple of things. One, we had a dilemma. Two, that this particular question was dealing with ethics, right? This type of question was the problem, or the person that we had to deal with was actually the social worker and not the client. So anytime, just by way of a tip, okay, let's do this by way of tip. Anytime you have an ethical question, ethics question, right? Notice the person that you will be dealing with will be the social worker. And it's quite, it makes sense because it's the social worker that's actually having the dilemma, or is the social worker that's faced with the ethical situation, and it's the social worker that has to make the appropriate and the proper decision. So notice that anytime you come across a situation and it's dealing with ethics, notice that the person that you're going to have to address and help work through that problem is you, the social worker. So keep that in mind. That's just a tip. Also, what do we have here? As far as content area that you want to go back and study, professional ethics and values. If you're taking the clinical exam, it's going to be about 18% of, the ASWB examination. Even with the LSW, you still want to pay attention to that area and make sure that you know ethics well. All right, and in ethical issues, what is covered in that area is knowing professional boundaries, dual relationships, identification and resolution of ethical dilemmas, and ethical and legal issues. So when you cover that area, you want to pay attention to that. For those of you who do not know, I do have a webinar, an audio version of the webinar that you can kind of listen to. It's about 2 hours long, and it covers all things ethics. It talks about the NASW code of ethics. It goes through every single point. It talks about the additions that were made for this year, 2018, and different things that you need to know. And as you can see here, the correct answer is D. Ethically, the social worker should discuss the impact of the conflict of interest with the client and refer to another social worker, as therapy has not started yet. All right, that's all I have for today. That was pretty exciting, kind of intense. I'm glad to see that the poll actually worked, because I wasn't really sure if it would. And with that,